Hello and welcome. You're back with the Design Principle podcast with myself, Gerard, from the Gerard Dombrowski Workshop, Ben, Beer Architecture, Sam from Arret. Today we're trying to venture into the topic of design. It's a big, large, weird, wonderful conversation, which is kind of a consistent thread, namely at the Design Principles podcast. So today we're going to talk about it in slightly more focus. Starting off with sort of like a chronological overview, I guess, of how we went through education and sort of our own stories and what we focus on and things that we want to focus on, I guess.
Nice. Do you want to kick us off then?
Yeah, I guess we all went to university together in the same class, so that's good context for everyone listening.
Victoria University, Wellington.
The good old days. Simpler times, one might say.
Take me back.
Yeah, so Ben, what do you reckon university sort of sets you up for in terms of design approaches?
Yeah, I loved it. I had a lot of fun. I was coming out of a building apprenticeship. So when I started, I was slightly older than everyone else, maybe 20. So, yeah, it had been 4 years or something since I'd been at school and just really enjoyed the challenge. And the design side of things, I guess it just got me thinking about how to be creative again, kind of lose that as a young age. So, yeah, I had a good time. I learned a lot.
Yeah, I remember it being like heavily conceptual from the start. It took me half a year to sort of figure out the expectation of the ideas that were expected.
It's interesting because, I think that's also Vic's approach in the sense that it's quite a conceptually focused school, whereas Unitec, for instance, is more technically focused. But I think one thing it teaches you, or probably the main thing it teaches you, is how to think critically. That's what I felt.
Yeah, architecture university students are famously critical.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of feedback was, you kind of get from those universities, probably Vic especially, is they don't really prepare you for practice. And that's all kind of, understandable. However, do you really want to be prepared for practice? I guess there's some interesting things that would have been great to know, maybe on the more business side of things. But in terms of design, it's really just about getting those creative juices flowing and coming up with your own design process. So when you are expected to develop a concept, you kind of have some idea of how to start and how to go about it. So I guess the fundamentals were there.
Interesting what you're saying, Ben, about, it teaches you how to design, and then obviously talking about moving into practice. And I think university, it teaches you good design skills, it teaches you to think critically, and it gives you the opportunity of freedom. There's very little parameters. And then for many of us, not all, but for many of us, you leave university and you go and work in a firm of varying scales. And that design, I guess, freedom is quashed a little bit depending on what role you move into of said firm. And then you almost have to retrain yourself how to design again. And Gerard, I think, based on my conversation points that you've outlined for today, that's going to be a big talking point for you.
Yeah, it's kind of like a roll of the dice for a lot of people on what autonomy they get within their practice or what sort of reign they get. University is super theoretical and allows you to think of crazy, awesome, exciting ideas, but it's kind of also, I've found it kind of suffers from lack of parameters. And sometimes parameters are seen as a negative thing. Oh, no, I'm too strained in. But I think more often than not, parameters are what leads to exciting design maneuvers, ways around things.
It was good for good for deadlines anyway.
Yeah,
by having parameters or not having parameters?
No, I just meant university in general. I feel like my memory of university is just so many deadlines and everything kind of being left to the last minute and put together in a hurry to get across the line, and all your presentations, you've had like no sleep the night before or only a few hours, and everyone was basically in the same boat, which was kind of hilarious considering the amount of work we actually had to do was sweet FA in comparison to now.
Yeah, hard. Each year you look back and you're like, oh, that was pretty manageable.
I'm like, I wish I could do it again so I could clean it up.
To be fair, those last-minute deadline rushes still continue into professional practice. Maybe I think it's just our character is that we leave everything to the last minute.
Yeah, well, the old adage, if you leave it to the last minute, it only takes a minute.
Well, yeah, I kind of know that about myself now. That's why I set the deadlines with such a tight time frame, so it forces me into that last minute, get it done stress.
Yeah. If you do it, then it's done.
Get it done, then it's done.
Time management's a whole other podcast that we should do sometime. I kind of need to set deadlines, otherwise you're like, you kind of need that bit of urgency, a little carrot and the stick.
Speaking of deadlines, Gerard, how's that door going for Rob?
Is that powder coat, mate?
Oh, good, sweet. I was there today. It's on the critical path, mate. So we got to get that thing in.
Oh, it's one of the it's one of the tidiest things I've built.
Oh, cool, nice.
Like usually I don't use a file. I'm just all power tools, but I've been filing the shit out of this.
Mate, that's not you. You helped me build my house, didn't you? That's not what I want to hear. And my chairs and tables.
Oh yeah, but you grounded those.
I did.
Those down.
I did.
That's why they're so good. Easily the best finishing on some of my chairs.
I'll take that.
You're hired, mate. You're here full time for the next week. Yeah, I think another thing that university attempts to educate I keep saying history and sort of looking at other architects as reference points, there's two conversations there: history and then looking at other artist models, I guess. History is one that I wasn't overly interested in architecture school, but nowadays is something I'm getting super interested in. And I think there's such a wealth of reference points that you can look to inform your architecture, and contextualize your architecture. Every site has its own tangible history, and and it might even be the family history of your client or your history.
I wonder if it's the way, Gerard, that they teach history at university. It's a long time ago now, but I feel like when they were teaching it, it was very classically focused or formally focused, kind of looking at actual built form and looking at stylistic history and things like that, rather than you're talking about a little bit more of a non-tangible history, which I think is probably more important.
Yeah, and some of it was probably just a bit dry, to be fair. Get a little sleep.
I'm trying to think if I've got any of the old history books sitting above me in my office here, but I think I might have.
Came in pretty handy when I was in Rome because I could name all 5 columns still.
Oh.
That's about all I got out of it.
You're 5 steps ahead of me. Heritage architect right there. I think the other one is in design class they'll tell you to go get a bunch of precedents, and when I was tutoring at university I saw some shocking examples of plagiarism. Just direct carbon copy of Zumthor's mine buildings plastered onto another site. Well, I guess it's a good place to go through the plagiarism education route whilst you're in school, rather than smashing out a building and realizing it's the exact copy of somebody else's.
It's interesting though. I've definitely heard professionals say that there are no new ideas. There's just ways that you build upon ones from the past, which I think is quite an interesting take. And there's architects out there that have built their careers off that concept. But
yeah, and architects build their careers off trying to rebuttal that concept.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you guys remember that building in Topor? It's pretty much carbon copy of one of the patchwork projects.
Yes, I remember that.
That lit up on Instagram for a while. But direct copy, pretty crazy. But like a poorly executed copy.
Do you know if there was any like acceptance there, or like was it with the people from Patchwork? Did they like agree to them to use that same concept, or do you reckon it was just a
no? There was it was
controversial
things being said on Instagram,
right?
But I think the people, it was like a little lodge thing, but they took down their Instagram page at the time. Maybe they stuck it back up.
Interesting.
But yeah, it's like a pretty bold move. New Zealand maybe just has a loose relationship with respecting design in the first place, but to go and copy somebody's buildings is pretty extreme.
I guess it's the benefit of us being bound by a code of ethics, right? We can't do that professionally, but we're not the only people that contribute to the built environment in New Zealand, and other people aren't beholden to such high standards.
Can't imagine it was an architect of that project.
No.
Ben, how did your thesis build project, because that was some pretty early sort of design build experience?
Yeah. That kind of came from the thesis subject, which was, efficiency in design or digital manufacturing. And my experience in construction, which kind of pointed out how inefficient traditional construction is. And so that was kind of process led. So I kind of worked a little bit backwards on that. I wasn't really like, okay, cool, there's this opportunity to design the 65 square meter studio. Let's design it and then figure out how to make it. I actually spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to make the building efficiently before the job kind of fell on my lap and we had designed it. And so I kind of worked backwards on that and designed it to suit the construction methodology. And also that was the first CLT building in the country that was for residential anyway. I'm not sure about commercial. So it was kind of like an untested material, and that material allowed for, CNC manufacturing, which was awesome. So that became a part of the process, and the design kind of came into fruition from that. So kind of a little bit backwards. I guess that's what's great about university. It allows you, especially like the thesis here, allows you just to test a whole bunch of crazy stuff and figure out a way to put it together. But I remember spending a heck of a long time on the actual details and making sure it goes together as clean and as efficient as possible, as opposed to making sure that it's the most beautiful, elegant building in the world, I guess. So in terms of aesthetics, although don't get me wrong, I was really happy with the design outcome, and I went through the standard design process of site inspection and that sort of thing, sun orientation, all those good things. So the design definitely wasn't lacking. It was more driven by the process, though, which I guess in a lot of ways has kind of become a lot of my design ethos, even to this day. That practicality in construction, I like cleanliness and I like details that really, really work.
It's interesting, being that it's something that you developed that long ago, is a decade ago or longer now ago, that you're still implementing. I was going to ask you that. Do you still design in that manner? And maybe you don't design in first principles in that manner, but it clearly seems like it's still a large focus of you in your design approach.
Yeah, it definitely is. I really enjoy that sort of simplicity in the design, but it's kind of gotten to a point now with a little bit more experience that I know there's really not much I can't build or get to that level of practicality. So it's kind of less prominent. Now I'm really focusing on my design process more of it in a traditional sense, to try and build up those skills a little bit more so I can kind of combine them a little bit more successfully.
Yeah, I think that was like a pretty epic little project and quite a beautiful silhouette, to be fair. And I think it's one of those maybe slightly rarer projects that nowadays that blends like a line of inquiry, like a conceptual thinking of, even if that is around construction, it's at the time still conceptual. And it kind of blends that mind frame of university conceptual with practicality, which is like a pretty good exemplar of like a good design process.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I never really thought of it that way, but I think we went to Kirsten Thompson's lecture the other day. She talked a lot about that line of inquiry, and it's such an I just found her design process that she has is just so much more in depth than what I'm currently capable of, and it definitely makes me feel like a kind of like a surface architecture or designer, so there's just so much more. I think there's just so much more to do in that area.
I think everybody left that talk being feeling like they could be a better architect, to be fair.
Yeah, that was a good lecture.
And for listeners out there, I'm pretty sure it was recorded. If you look at the Fortuna lecture 2024 with Kirsten Thompson, give that a view. It's pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah, she's done some epic work. And
also, she was awarded the Australian gold medal, so she's a pretty epic architect.
Deservingly so.
Yeah, and you do that quite a bit yourself, don't you, Gerard? I mean, like even the piccolo was kind of from a similar sort of thing. Your brief was like mix art with architecture. It seems to come more natural to you.
Don't know about that. I think the line of inquiry thing's quite big for me. Like when I first went into practice, we're just sort of making buildings. There's no like deeper thing you're searching for, no bigger wave that you're picking out of the set. So like I quite like to focus, I think, on projects that are contributing something to what I find, valuable within my practice. So like the piccolo, I've been looking into instinctive architecture, like pottery. Sometimes you've cut out a bit of clay and you throw it on your wheel and you might change your mind, or it's instinctive and there's tactility and you're working with the material and you're molding it as you go. So the idea with the piccolo was that, yes, everything's for free and there's very strict, these are your materials. So I had to forage for materials. But the idea was that I wasn't really going to draw anything. I was just going to start building. I kind of broke that rule and did a thumbnail, but it was a thumbnail. So there's no details or on a notepad. Damn it! I broke the cardinal rule. But yeah, that kind of birthed out of this idea around instinctive decision making, trying to train yourself to design. Came out of like a frustration with the first office of there not being any like architectural intent other than enclosure and maybe some loose aesthetic. We want to make something pretty, but for me, I wanted like a deeper line of inquiry, like your house, and designing backwards via construction is a far deeper line of inquiry than just aesthetic or fulfilling a program brief.
And may I just quickly ask, why do you find that so important?
I think it focuses, like, I think I'm pretty big on like viewing my work as like a body of work. So my furniture or my architecture, like I want it all to, well, it's all mine. So like I bring myself to it. So I think design is inherently part of the designer. And I think to detach ourselves fully from what we're designing. So that's one very clear thread in all my work is my work, and being a sole practitioner that sits in a shed by themselves and chips away, it becomes fairly easy. Like at some point, it would be
A deep thought.
nice to
as he ponders life.
Yeah. You catch me just thinking.
Yeah, I do a lot of thinking, eh?
When I first got my little workshop, I used to just sit there and think, and I'd have this motto: "Don't think, do," because otherwise I'd just sit there and look at the chair that I was making. So I used to be a lot slower and thoughtful. Now when I make furniture, it's like, all right, let's make a chair. So, bam.
Do you find that instinctive kind of more knee-jerk response, like better is not necessarily the right term, but maybe, I don't know, does it breed more interesting things, more interesting designs?
Yes, I don't know. We'll ask us that in 20 years.
Because I think you can definitely overthink things, right? Like in design in general, and there's always a point where, and you never quite know where it is, but there's that point of you've gone too far with certain designs. You can spend way too long on them, and you can almost ruin them by overthinking the hell out of it. I'm working on stage 2 of my house, and I've redesigned that thing 11 times now, and it's getting to the point where I'm like, just fucking commit to something. You know what I mean? Just do it and just go, that's it, boom, done.
Yeah.
Don't change your mind.
Yeah, definitely not that cut and dry, but there's a wonderful little window in there somewhere, I guess.
Yeah.
There's that sweet spot, but it's really hard to find.
Where does the iterative process lie within that? Obviously your furniture, for example, you have a quick idea, maybe a quick sketch, you go and build the thing, and then the next one is probably the next iteration of the last one. That's the iterative process for furniture in some way.
Yeah,
But what about for architecture? For example, Sean Godsill, he is adamant that he comes up with a concept and then he tries to stick with that initial concept as much as possible. Is there any room for iteration prior to, construction or completion or throughout the process?
Or is it building to building, are you saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think my theory on that's probably more back to that sort of pottery analogy. As you get closer to finishing the pot, you're kind of molding down into a finer level of detail and you're making smaller design moves.
Right.
But if you're then going to build half a house, crush it, and start again, I think that's a different kettle of fish.
Interesting. Yeah.
I think if I just give a little bit more context to that, how that intuitive design thought came around for me, I think it was like at the initial job, everything was very linear, which is pretty common and expected within architecture. Like clients need to know what they're building, councils need to know what they're building, et cetera, et cetera. But within me, there's this desire to think of a more interesting or alternative way. Maybe I am somebody who likes to reinvent wheels slightly. So my first chair that I built kind of came out of that frustration. I brought a shipping container and started a tiny little workshop in Lyle Bay. In the first chair, I challenged myself not to draw anything. That was another rule that I broke slightly, was a couple of sketches. But this chair that I made is on my website. I think it's Cow and Basket. Came out of 4 little pull-apart canvas steel sort of fold-away chairs. And I chopped them up and then just kind of held them in place and tack welded them together. I hadn't welded before. I had to go to Bunnings and buy a little welder. That's how I learned how to weld. But out of that process came a couple of shed beers and a chat with a good friend of mine, Pat, who makes awesome push bikes. And we were talking about if you could train yourself to make good design decisions by following first instinct principles. Like this is what I'm going to do, then you stuck with it within the context of furniture and small scale projects where you're not ruining anybody's lives. But you can finish the project, look back, critique, and then on your next one, then you follow. And ideally, hopefully, you make better and better decisions. And I kind of worked on that for probably 5 years before I now probably weigh things up a bit more.
Do you reckon, though, Gerard, that working through that first instinct, just design it, learn from the last one, sorry, it will apply to the next one, evolve. You sort of hard on a visual thing, but it's like a weaving stream, right? And you're kind of meandering your way down, trying to find like that main body of water. Do you think you've just said 5 years on now you're a little bit more, I guess, focused? Do you think that all of that iterative work has eventually now molded itself into like a good design approach and philosophy that you can now apply more confidently?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I don't think I was a terrible designer at university, but my main designing learning came when I got the workshop and worked in that. I kind of thought of it for a long time as the gym for design. If you could smash out a few chairs within half a year or something, then that's a lot more design learning that you've just given yourself than one building in a 2-year long process. I just thought the feedback loop of architecture is so long that it's really hard to. There's just a lag time for feedback before you realise you did something good or bad.
Yeah.
And then I think much like how Ben probably building apprenticeship led him to have a good enough awareness of construction to be able to design backwards, whereas most university kids probably wouldn't be able to pull that off. I think building stuff in the workshop with furniture allowed me to play and experiment with materials and maybe understand how they come together slightly better. It's not quite a building, but...
And is there a correlation between that, what you've learned through that process of developing and building furniture to, say, your architecture now?
Yeah, I think as I go, I've kind of been in this conversation with myself on art and architecture. So like a chair becomes too chair-like for me, so then I counter it with a chair that's
with
very comfortable when you can't sit on it. And then it's like, so I think within architecture, I'm as much of an explorer. So you're wanting to create something beautiful that works for your client, that they can be stoked with. But at the same time, I personally am trying to experiment a little bit and come up with new ways of doing things. Like Sam was saying, maybe that's impossible and we're using the same old toolkit. But much like designing a chair over and over again, there's so much fun to be had in designing something over and over again. So I don't think I'd ever get bored of the toolkit.
Well, it's interesting because like that designing over and over again thing, even if you're designing the same thing over and over again, which a lot of us end up doing through the iterative process, be it, project to project or within a project, every single time you put pen to paper, or maybe not in your case, Gerard, or even just think about a design, you're always tackling it slightly differently. You're not redoing the same thing every single time. So even those little minute changes or adjustments can lead themselves to a good iterative process, I found.
Oh, definitely. That's probably the epitome of iteration there.
Yeah.
And we'll get better and better at these things, or maybe we'll look back and the first one we made was the most pure and most beautiful, and everything else was...
Well, that's so true, right? Like, you talk about that, like just design immediately, first principles, instinctive design. And, there's always that old adage, your first answer is always right. Maybe that is the case. And you just spend a long time, hopefully not a whole career, making everything slightly worse.
Maybe. I think to develop this thinking, self-critique is massively important, and critique where you can find it and trust it. I think for anybody, if you can find somebody that you respect that will offer you critique, is invaluable, I think, to your own design development. Because so often universities kind of loosen the rein on the crit, but I think that's where we learn so much, when somebody with more knowledge than you can sort of feed into your life. Like, you're getting more out of that than they are, even if it's hurting your feelings.
Well, yeah. I mean, at university, you can be reduced to tears in a critique, but in the professional realm, it doesn't really happen anymore. not saying that it's a good or bad thing, but there isn't really that mechanism for really involved, truthful and critical response within the design process in practice. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it seemed Kirsten in her lecture mentioned that her office does design crits, and I think like probably a handful of offices do that internally, and it's probably super beneficial within their work. Harder by yourself.
Yeah.
In your shed. Thinking.
How about yourself, Sam? Have you got like an interesting process, or is it more just experience that you've acquired over time?
Yeah, we're sort of. It's interesting hearing both of you guys talk, and my process, I guess our practices process now sort of falls into the camp of two things that you guys have discussed. I mean, we're really championing a certain product or a material which helps with modular construction, and so we're using that that module, like a 1200 by 2400 module, as a design driver, and seeing how far we can push that and how creative we can be with a material size that's universal and therefore means that under construction is going to be super low waste. So that sort of like, I guess, leans into what you've talked about, Ben, with your process. And then also, Gerard, I think, I don't know if it's necessarily an instinctive decision, but I've found that in the last sort of 3 or 4 buildings that I've designed or completed, there's a clear lineage through them. And I wouldn't say that they look the same, but they're definitely siblings, if you know what I mean. And
yeah,
my approach each time, very different sites, very different constraints from terms of budget and constructability and things like that. But ultimately, the outcome's very similar. And just for want of a better term, I like to really like summarize it in sort of the most basic form is I've just looked at stacking, really. And just the way that you can stack elements together, be that entire building modules or be that materials, and stacking's kind of been like a big focus, and it's clearly, visible through the last sort of several designs that I've done. But I still haven't landed on what works 100%, and I think we're all very young designers, and it will take a long time, a whole career, to realize what your golden egg is.
Yeah, often only done in absolute hindsight, probably by somebody else.
Well, exactly right. I don't think you ever know, because you're always going to be seeking something else or seeking something different, or right at the start of the podcast we talked about precedent and external influence, and you'll see something that will pique your interest, or a design that you'll want to know more about, and you'll go into it in depth and find out what the processes were behind that, and then you adopt some of that into your own design, and therefore it's going to influence it. So it's a constantly evolving practice.
It's a little bit like surfing. We're out there in search of something, in search of the next wave. I think that's that little need in there to like keep searching and keep looking, I think is a core tenet to design, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's funny. It'd be interesting to see what your thoughts are on this, but having designed my own house, you like to think that the design that you've done for your own house, where you have your own brief and you're kind of unconstrained in a way, means that you'd be able to put all of your design learning together and produce your best design. But it's definitely not the case.
Yeah, but you're always testing a little bit more with your own stuff because you can get away with it, But yeah, it's definitely not the case for me as well. Unfortunately, there's a whole bunch of stuff I would go back and change. However, I think somehow, I'm not sure how, but I think like one of the hard things about architecture is you don't really generally get to spend a hell of a lot of time on site. So for your own house, like for mine especially, And I lived there for years before I built a house on it. So I knew exactly where everything was, where the prominent wind direction was, the trees, the contours, what I could get away with moving, the sun, especially in a place like Wellington. I guess like mine kind of what Gerard was talking about just came out instinctively, just based on the amount of time that I'd actually spent on that site. So if I would go back, I wouldn't actually change the general design of my house. It would just be some of that fine tuning stuff, polishing it around the edges. But yeah, so that's not a big deal, but it is quite interesting going through the process now where you don't really get to spend a hell of a lot of time on site. You might do like a quick site investigation, take some photos, etc. But it's so much harder to really just get those instinctive thoughts and about the site when you haven't actually like experienced it for even a day. So yeah, I think that's quite interesting. It's hard to design off photos or a site analysis.
Yeah, your house is like, in terms of sunshine, it's pretty epic. Like such a nice space to hang out in, and the timber ceiling and the beams.
Yeah,
and then down to the details of your hidden steel plates to make your portal frame. I think it's pretty well executed house.
Thanks, mate.
Props given.
That's how we build it.
Yeah. That's why it's so good. No.
Yeah, exactly.
I think education has a little misstep, I think, in that it perhaps teaches you that not to not do things instinctively. One of the key learning moments I had in uni was when a tutor was like, I'm not sure why I did this, I just did it. And he was like, you do. You've done it. You've done it for a reason. You just don't know what the reason is. Like it's within you somewhere. And that's when I started to change my view on design a little bit and start to have a little bit more courage to back myself and think about what my input was versus looking for external influence from a mid-century architect that I really liked and picking bits out of their building to put in mine.
It's interesting. Sorry, Gerard, continue.
That's kind of it, really. Just learning to back yourself a little bit, and then from there, you start to build up your own body of work and start to figure out your design identity, I guess, what you're interested in. Yeah.
It's interesting you make that comment about having to justify yourself or justify a design decision, because I don't know about you guys, but I've so often just done something, and be it an epiphany, be it sort of some deep-seated influence that's manifested somehow or whatever, or even just doodling on a piece of paper and all of a sudden you're like, oh, that looks like it works. But every single time, particularly when it comes to presenting to clients, I've always felt that I've had to justify that somehow, and be that try and connect it to site, or try and connect it to a precedent, or try and connect it to some line of thinking. And so often you're trying to post-rationalize something that just really has no backing. It's like doing a maths test and getting the right answer but having no working behind it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
No, I completely agree. In fact, I'd definitely prefer that than, turn up to site and find this shell and be like, oh, the contours of the shell mimic the site, and that's why I've created this circular ceiling structure.
I am the
but also that's also a beautiful way to design. It's just not the only way to design. I guess it's kind of what we're getting to in the crux of this conversation, right? Is that there is no right answer. There's just lots of different approaches.
I personally find that can be very cringy sometimes. I will never be the type of person that says any of that shit to a client. So
this shell I found.
Can you remember? It's a great video. It's a video of Frank Gehry designing, and he's basically like sitting in a chair, and he's got some lackey scrunching up bits of paper for him and sticking them on a thing, and he's like, "Oh, now cut that up. Now pull that off. Now scrunch that bit of paper up. Yeah, that'll do." kind of approach. I mean, it's interesting. It's just a different way of tackling a problem, right?
Yeah, Bjarke makes some very clear and design changes kind of like that. In a similar way, though, his I think are a lot more kind of practical, but also just using a heck of a lot of common sense. So it can be done. It can be done successfully as well.
Yeah, I think university taught everyone in our year anyway to hate Frank Gehry. I think there's a massive misunderstanding there, because the guy has got some of the gnarliest, most complex buildings built.
Yeah.
He's got them across the line.
Yeah.
That guy must be one hell of a communicator in a meeting.
Yeah, I think he's remarkable. I think the buildings are remarkable. They're not necessarily, to everyone's taste, but it's incredible architecture.
The commitment to process and then the technical understanding to get that built. I mean, they used to develop software around that bloody office. That's just truly epic.
Basically the reason Rhino exists, right?
Yeah, the guy's wild. I think influence from other architects is a big thing for me, because I view myself and my practice, and it's what sort of work am I trying to do? What, these themes that we're talking about, quite influenced by other architects, which much like everyone, I think. I kind of think at the moment there's a whole generation of mini Zumthors making very beautiful, elegant, elemental architecture, sort of all across Australia and New Zealand, I think, at the moment.
Yep. Well, is anyone influenced by another architect's or firm's process as opposed to just their building?
Yes. Much like Zumthor being elemental and very refined material architect, I think Anne Holtrop is another one making beautifully refined buildings that are super material and process rich, and somebody that I've taken big influence from within the material exploration side of things. So that's just playing with materials is something that's becoming massive for me. And Holtrop, for example, made a column, I think there's a fabric sleeve that then cast the column inside.
Yeah,
so then you get this.
I've seen that. That's awesome.
So more fabric quality to it. And
it's a product now. Did you know that?
Yeah.
Epic. One of the most interesting architects, I think, of the time at the moment. And the exploration with glass casting and then aluminium casting, then making these wall concrete panels by just digging in the ground seemingly haphazardly, and then casting a very crisp panel over top of it and just tilting it up, and then that texture becoming the finished face of the wall.
Yeah, wow.
So
that's awesome.
I think that process and that connection to material and structure is super important.
How much do you think that, and Gerard, how much do you think that you need the right clients to be able to kind of embark on that experimentation, or do you think that it's a practice's responsibility to experiment sort of on their own time? That's something that we've discussed in our practice, is one of our business goals for this year, or practice goals for this year, is to spend more time on R&D, basically, and just design processes and things. But
yeah, I think 100% practice. It has to be an intention or a goal of yours to outwork these things,
rather than waiting for a client to come and say, "Hey, I want you to do something extravagant with concrete till panels." You need to go and find that yourself, is what you're getting.
Yeah, so you start designing it in.
Yeah, if you get an overly specific brief asking for a concrete panels cast in the ground, but look all get dirty.
Yeah, but I'd argue that's been a shortcoming of ours, has been not affording ourselves that time to be experimental and sort of hoping for a project that will let you do that.
Yeah.
And we've
Yeah, I
realised
think-
that and been like, oh shit, we've kind of done ourselves a discredit here. We need to be more proactive. But I feel like that's something, Gerard, that you've been doing for a while now.
Yeah, off the theory that you get the work you're seen doing. So if that's one of the reasons why I take time to document everything that I do, is that it adds to this body of work that hopefully the right people that like to explore and come up with strange ideas see, and then you attract those type of clients.
Yeah.
That's the theory. Ask me in 20 years whether that works.
Yeah.
But I think the notion that I'm waiting for the perfect client is also a big driving force in the way I do things. That was the attitude of the previous office. And so I thought if I could flip that business model and be kind of particular about the work I did, with the idea that you might get the work you're seeing doing. Ambitious. We'll see. But yeah, I think it's the role of the architect to explore what they're inherently interested in. Even if it's a retaining wall in a garden and that's what you're getting to push your things out on.
And then I guess it's a matter of being confident in being able to implement that into any project. Like you said, start small if a client's unsure and then build bigger and bigger and bigger, right?
Yeah.
But you need to be confident in yourself to employ that into designs, because so often I feel like we're reticent to, because we're like, oh, they might not like that. Maybe tried.
Is it acceptable to take the other route and just get a lot built?
Of course. I mean, everything's acceptable. These are just different ways of skinning a cat.
It's a few ways to skin the old cat. A few ways to skin a stone. Yeah. There's, I think, one allows you to start now and one allows you to maybe start in 10 years. So for me, experimentation and playing is super important to me. So I kind of put that above making money at this stage of my career. There's a quote from a little video Daniel Libeskind did, Advice to the Young, that I've taken far too seriously and implemented far too rigorously in my life, was that do what you love and take risks while you're young and you will never be a loser. I used to repeat it in this office that I was sharing a space in over and over again. You'll never be a loser. Made me no friends.
But I don't see why it can't be one and the same. I don't see why you can't make money and have fun creating the type of architecture you want to create.
I think that comes back down to the confidence in your ability as well, right? You know, you need to be able to, and this is, sorry to harken back to the Kirsten Thompson lecture, but this is something that she really drove home, was you need to be able to promote yourself well, and not just yourself, but the role of the architect well. And you really need to kind of go into bat for each other in the built realm. And there's far too much that's done out there that is generic and boring because architects aren't involved. But it's our role to make the built environment interesting, and therefore, like, we should be involved at all stages. So yeah, we could definitely still make money and be creative and experimental. Yeah,
architects definitely need to advocate for architecture a little bit more vocally, I think. Thomas Heatherwick's Humanize campaign have just launched for studies by scientist people into the correlation between your brain, self-esteem, well-being, and the quality of your built environment. I don't know if that's overly been done in such a direct way before, so that'll be an interesting thing to be able to quote
What's
one
the
day.
outcome? Hopefully positive.
The formal studies have just been launched last week or something on there.
I think we could all agree, without the study even being undertaken, that your environment, the environment in which you exist in, be that your home, be that your work environment, social environment, whatever, does directly influence your health, both mentally and physically.
Yeah, I think it'll be a pretty awesome study. We should do something on that campaign at some
that
point.
sounds good. Hey, Sam, just going back to what you were talking about before regarding the R&D, what kind of things have you been thinking about?
Well, I guess this comes back to this sort of, I've talked about it before, this citrus concept where last year we're sort of we weren't frustrated. Yeah, we were frustrated and concerned about the lack of work coming in, and we're like, we need to front foot this, and we're like, well, what's something that's super important to us as a practice and we see as being critical in particularly the residential built environment, and that's high performance and quality, but also efficiency. And so that's where we came up with the idea to take 1200 by 24 module and then just try and design buildings purely based on that, 100%. So you're essentially looking at zero wastage. So that's been an R&D process for us, and we've designed 6 buildings, full packages, prospectus, everything. We've put in huge amounts of work in that realm for zero financial gain so far. But like what that's enabled us to do is it's enabled us to be super experimental, and we've learned a lot in that process. We've learned, holy shit, you can do a lot with a simple module. And formally and aesthetically, you're not really that constrained. You just have to be clever. So that's been a really good process. And then I think what we've just started doing a little bit more, something that we've always wanted to do but never afforded ourselves the time to do, is model, just 3D model and just play. I mean, Gerard, I'm sure that you do that a lot, but so often in practice, concept design work, what have you, it's not, people don't model like they did at university or whatever. And I think that's because it's seen as taking a long time.
Are you talking about like massing or what in particular?
Yep, massing, materiality, details, like one-to-one scale stuff, anything. Just focus on like more tangible and physical 3D design development. We so quickly move into like a computer or a digital realm or what have you.
When's the last time you built a model, like a physical model?
Me?
Yeah.
Maybe like 2 weeks ago.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
That's good.
High score.
I need to build more models.
But before then, it was probably 2 years. And that's because I've made a conscious decision to try and do it more, like it's...
Yeah. What do you go for? Like polystyrene or clay or what's your media? What's your media of choice?
I'm just a classic white card kind of guy.
Yep, the class.
Yep. What mill are we talking about?
We're talking like 1.2 mil.
Okay,
Hold up.
How sharp's your scalpel?
Here's some card.
Oh, yeah, good.
Yeah, buddy.
Yeah.
Okay, and did you find it useful?
Absolutely. Formerly, I was able to test so many different things that would have spent me ages trying to work out how to draw or model on a computer very quickly. Like within half an hour, 45 minutes, it was a roof form that I was trying to work out. And I was trying to work out the proportions of it and the angles of it. And within like 45 minutes, I'd maybe done 10, 12 different iterations and landed on one that looked correct. And then basically I took something that was this big and went and scaled it up to the size of a building and it was sorted.
Quick one-to-one mock-up.
Yeah.
What about you, Gerard? Do you do any mock-up modelling? Steel?
Yeah. Yeah.
Fold the steel?
I have made some steel architecture models.
Oh, awesome. That's the
also
dream.
like a big site mesh. So I think getting that context is pretty nice.
Made out of offcuts.
Bigger the better.
Yeah.
Old mate Zimthor, I think only till that tar pits project where they all hit council and everyone had a whinge and wanted more actual renders. Previous to that, he would only take photos of models and then put a little bit of photoshopping to chuck a couple of people in there or something.
Cool.
So their office make massive models. So like their internal renders are photographs of a model. So then you can like kind of get a more natural light quality and
that's awesome.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty epic way to work. I think I haven't gone to that extent.
R&D, man. Afford yourself the time.
Yeah, hard.
What about you, Ben?
Definitely inspired by that.
Yeah, we at Makers obviously used to do a bit more, but had a nice workshop, so not so much at the moment.
You used to do lots of one-to-one mock-ups, didn't you? They just happen to have building consents on them.
Yeah.
I'll make you a model the size of your house.
I used to get into making them out of, just CNCing them. Just, I don't know. Seemed like a fun thing to do when you've got a CNC machine and no clients coming in.
Shit, yeah, press print.
That was definitely early stages. But nah, I haven't for a while, but I've been thinking a lot about it recently, and I think I'm going to do one. I'm going to do one.
You are going to do one.
I'm going to do one within the next
Watch
2
the
weeks.
space, people. We said it.
Can you bring it?
By the time the next episode,
you have to bring it in. Show and tell.
Model done.
Show and tell for the next episode is your
Show and tell. Oh, okay. That's a lot appreciated.
We'll get the videos popping off.
Cool.
My niece actually has some plaster, so maybe I bust that out.
Nice.
Yeah, I think the just using your hands is pretty epic. There's a lot to be benefited from that. Perhaps after university, you go through practice and economics get in the way, and you have to smash stuff out pretty quickly unless your office has a model making budget. But I think making is epic, and to me, making is the design gym.
Yeah, what's your saying?
Will help you in
busy fingers. What is it?
Oh, there was a little quote which sort of validated my whole thing. Was Renzo Piano, the OG building workshop guy, had this quote: "Happy hands, happy mind."
Nice.
Oh, nice. Yeah,
the thought was if you're building stuff, then it is ultimately good for your morale, self-esteem.
Is that a good place to end things?
Yeah, I've got a model to make now.
I think I just want a little sum up of
you go for it, mate.
That people should give things a go, give it a crack. Again, we've just done a chair exhibition in Christchurch with Object Space, and a pretty awesome thing to be included in. But within that, you have chats with some people, and they're like, "Oh, I could never design a chair," or "Oh, you need to design all these other bits of furniture before you design a chair." But something like that is essentially a small building. I think people shouldn't feel that barrier, and they should just give things a crack, and you might surprise yourself.
Nice.
Just get into it.
Just get it done, then it's done.
Cool.
If you do it, then it's done. That's part of it.
Speaking of doing it, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave a review or leave a comment. Even better, feel free just to send a comment, and if you have anything interesting that you want us to talk about, we'd love to know about it.
Send it to
what's our email address that they're sending this to?
info@designprinciplespod.com, or hit our DMs at designprinciplespod on IG.
Easy.
And we'd love to hear from you.
Shortest email address ever.
Yeah.
That's the pod.
Thank you.
See you.
Thank you.